Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host, Keith Crockford, and today I have got a new guest with me. Some of you might recognise him because he's one of our new guides. He's done a fair few trips for us this year, and I thought it was about time that we got him onto the podcast. So, hello, Jack.
Hey, Keith. Hey, hi, everyone.
How was that for an introduction?
That was quite good. That's practiced, I think. You've definitely done that before. But that's a lovely intro.
Straight off the cuff, the same as every single one of my podcasts, unplanned, and let's just have a conversation. So I thought it would be great to get Jack on. Jack's done a fair few trips for us this year. He's got some more in the bag for us next year. We've had some great feedback from our clients about Jack and his guiding. So we thought it was his turn to come onto the podcast, introduce himself to those of you who haven't met Jack yet, but also share some of his wisdom as well from the trips that he's been on this year. So, Jack, we'll start off with, you've been in the outdoor industry for quite a while. That's how we came to sort of know about you. But let's just start off with, how did you get into this job in the first instance? What's been your past?
Oh, well, so, I mean, looking back, all the way, you look back, really early, I was doing scouting and things like that, and I thought that was fantastic. I did that for a while, and then, GCSEs come into it, and then I did my A-levels, and then as I was doing my A-levels, I realised I wasn't very good at my A-levels in terms of writing down the answers to the questions. So I kind of didn't really know if I was going to make it to uni or not. I wanted to do outdoor leadership at uni or geology. That was one or two. That was very different. And so I kind of picked an apprenticeship to do just in case for outdoor leadership, because I think doing it as a job opposed to studying it for 4 years was better for myself. And I decided to go for the apprenticeship straight away. And thankfully I did, because if I'd waited for my results, the results were okay, but they weren't what I needed to get into uni. So I had an apprenticeship job in the outdoor industry to start that. And then it's kind of gone from there, really.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it's very similar to me in essence, because I did exactly the same thing. I did go to university and did outdoor leadership at university. I'm a little bit older than you are, so apprenticeships
only slightly.
Thanks for that, Jack. But they weren't around as much back then. But I think interestingly now, because obviously I've got the outdoor centre in Devon as well, we do use a lot of the apprenticeship model within there, because in our industry, it's hard to gain the skills, isn't it? And I think the other issue that people have is, I know, people who have gone and done outdoor courses, and they are still very theory based rather than being practical based. And you can go and do a 2-year course or a 3-year course, but actually come out with no practical qualifications at the same time.
It's just all paper, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And then you struggle to be able to actually get a job in the industry because you haven't got the qualifications that these places want to have. So I think the apprenticeship model now, and it's the one that when people come and speak to me and say, I want to get into the industry, how do I get into it? And I think it's, I'll always push them down the apprenticeship route, because, the apprentices that we have working for us do gain a lot of the practical day-to-day qualifications that you then need to go and get a job. And, unfortunately nowadays, the outdoor industry always used to be so low paid. And then, providers would then, I remember my first ever job, and we're going back a long time now, but I got £50 a week. And I got to live there for free. And like I got my food included and it was really good. But obviously you're not allowed to pay someone £50 a week anymore. I wish I could, but we're not allowed to. But ultimately, like, the problem with that is if you've now got to pay someone a considerable amount of money to come and work for you, you want them to already hold the qualifications to be able to do the job. Like, you're not going to take someone that doesn't have any qualifications, pay them a wage, and also pay for all their training as well, which is why I think the apprenticeship is such a good way of doing it.
I think with mine as well, it was a lot of the qualifications that I got were in-house qualifications, which worked for the companies. I mean, you saying £50 a week for you getting paid. I think if I remember right, it was £3.40 an hour was my apprenticeship wage, which was you look at it monetarily, it's not fantastic, but then again, I had my accommodation kind of only a small amount taken out of my wage. I had my food a small amount taken out of my wage. We lived on site, so it was kind of this whole kind of encompassing culture of just work, live together, play. But you're completely right. To get into the industry now, it can cost a massive amount of money initially to get all the qualifications, to then start work, but you've got no experience in the work. So the apprenticeship gets you kind of having the experience, and then as you earn the money, you can pay for the qualifications to then get some more work. But yeah, definitely. No, I agree. I think the apprenticeship works really well, and it's very humbling, because if people think you can go into an industry and earn max dollars straight away, then, I mean, especially in this industry, you're kidding yourself, because you can't.
Yeah, especially in this industry. And I think, it's one thing that we always say, though, is that we don't do in-house qualifications. Like, we will give nationally recognized national governing body qualifications, so they are usable wherever you go, because I think that is the important thing. You want to start people off and give them those opportunities, but if you're only ever going to train them to work on your climbing wall, then it's kind of almost pointless at that point.
And I think it's progressed, hasn't it? Like, national qualifications wise, because I mean, for years, even like with my journey in this kind of industry, qualifications and stuff have been kind of, so there's some that work and some that kind of are useful but not needed, and it's getting a lot better now, where it goes, actually, if you want to do this, you need this, and this.
Yeah, exactly. So you did your apprenticeship, and then did you stay on in work there after your apprenticeship? Because I know a lot of people finish their apprenticeship, move on. Did you stay there and gain some experience there, or? Well,
it was weird, because a lot of, like you say, a lot of people do the apprenticeship and then they move on. And again, it's a young people's game. I think that apprenticeship is not always, but it can be a young person's game. So we were all young doing it. Not to say that I'm not young now, or we're not young now, just saying. But I had the opportunity to get a senior position. So I went for interviews for a kind of permanent activity leader and also guest services, which was a senior role. So I went for both, and I got offered both, which was really good. And I went for the guest services role because I'd done the activity leading. And I think in my mind, I was like, I've been outside now. I want to try the office. Let me try this office side and this guest services side. The warm, the constant coffee and the constant tea and the snacks on the side. I wanted to try that. And I went into that for just over a year. But then I think as I was doing it, as much as it's great work, at that point in time, I was like, I think I need to go back and try something a bit more guest-led in terms of leading activities. Because guest services stuff was great. It was all about managing like transport for kids and when they're on site, and going and doing excursions and things like that, making sure there was activity leaders assigned to teams, doing the feedback, doing the rebooking, because there was a team of people who all did different elements of it in terms of accommodation and rota planning, and then me and a colleague of mine who were the kind of front of houses talking to the clients a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's rota planning is the bane of my life. When I know exactly what that's like when you've got 600 kids split into groups of 12 and every one of them need an instructor and 5 are on holiday. It causes you some issues.
Luckily, that wasn't massively my forte. Like, I remember as an apprentice, you walk into the kind of staff room, and we had a TV on the wall, and it was just the rotas for the day. And if anything needed to be changed, it was updated. It was like, okay, I'm on Jacob's Ladder, I'm on Leap of Faith, I'm on the climbing wall, I'm on Nightline, which was a blindfold activity. And then going from that busyness to then me managing and my colleague managing, like, the bookings in a way, like the booking system, everything was on this one spreadsheet and making sure the information was right. And I went from physicality to spreadsheets in like a week, and it was just very, very, very abrupt.
Quick learning curve.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what did you do after you left there then?
So it was quite interesting. So I was working there, and it was down in Kent where I was working. So I'm from Birmingham, kind of near Birmingham. And I was down in Kent for a couple of years doing my apprenticeship and doing the senior guest services stuff. And then I wanted to move back home. A lot of my friends were moving back home after uni for themselves. And so I was looking for jobs closer to home. And I saw a advert for a brand or a new opening called the Bear Grylls Adventure, which was at the NEC, and they were looking for a team leader role. And I was like, well, I've done this guest services, and I've had this experience with clients, and then I've done this apprenticeship with like actually talking to the kids and the teachers and leading those sessions. So I thought, I'll give it a try. And I remember going home for an interview on like one of my days off. Had this interview in the NEC because the building wasn't even built at this point. This was 2018. Or it was just finishing being built. And I went for my interview, and I got the job. And again, it was like going from the outdoors to the transition to the spreadsheets. That transition was so quick. It was the same for me leaving. I had a really short notice period, and then I went home, and then we started working. I started working at this place, and it was a brand new thing. It was the first thing of its kind that was being opened, like this activity centre, which is very common, but it had things like scuba diving with sharks, it had indoor skydiving, it had all this stuff, and it was all linked to the Bear brand, which was great. And I was a big fan of Bear growing up with the Scouts and all his shows, and so I was like, I'm going to try this. And yeah, it was very interesting, quick transition, and then a quick start at the Bear Grylls Adventure. Yeah.
And then from there, obviously, unfortunately, it's literally just had its last days over the weekend there, which is sad news. And I know you were there this weekend, and you still pop back and do a bit of work for them now as well, because it is, like you say, literally on your doorstep. But how did you then get into doing more of the Bear Grylls stuff? Because you've basically travelled the world under the Bear Grylls banner, haven't you?
I've been really lucky to go some really cool places. That's with the bucket list as well, but with the Bear brand as well. So what happened with kind of my evolution into that was I was at the Bear Grylls Adventure, and because it was a new opening, it was very like how that business park ran was very up in the air, because again, first kind of centre of its kind, people didn't really know how kind of the staffing was going to work and how how much the pricing was going to be, and it was a big learning curve for everyone there, and for Merlin Entertainments is the company that own the Bear Grylls Adventure along with the Bear brand. And so for the first kind of year, 2 years, it was very kind of testing a lot of things. Okay, let's try run stuff this way. Let's try and run stuff that way. Maybe we'll try staffing a different way. Maybe we'll run people on block activities and not one person moving around, because the product changed all the time as well. We had big hero products, which wasn't kind of what I was in charge of, but we had the scuba diving with sharks, which was brilliant. The kind of skydiving, the kind of high ropes area outside, which is the highest freestanding high ropes course in Europe, all these big activities. And so where I was in the midst of this was something we called Base Camp, which then evolved into the adventure team. And so Base Camp was like a series of mini activities, like 4 mini activities that every person's ticket had initially in the beginning. So it was like a little it was like we called it the fear zone. So it was going through different obstacles and kind of playing on different fears that people might have and you might experience outside, kind of survival wise. And then a little escape room, a Royal Marines inside, a salt course, and then like an archery. And that whole thing took about an hour and a half. What would happen was people would come in for their hero activities, their shark dive, if it was that, and then they'd have this base camp hour and a half activity. But what ended up happening was, in the first instance, we had everyone arrive in the morning to then do the base camp and then go to their hero activity after. And if I remember rightly, we were sending groups of 16 people in to start this circuit every 2 minutes. Every 2 minutes, we sent 16 people in to start this circuit. And it looked like we needed 36 staff per hour to like run this thing. And so that's not sustainable, obviously. And I was one of 3 team leaders and then a supervisor above us. And so we kind of could put our heads together and the higher-ups put their heads together. And then the kind of product changed where they were individual and people could go to them at their own time. And then from there, it evolved and evolved. And I remember like getting to the point where we were like, okay, this is a lot more efficient now. We can run this better. It's not being pulled left, right, and sideways. But, same as every new openings. But it was really, really good. And then there's another element of the Bear Grylls brand called the Bear Grylls Survival Academy that was started in 2010. So the Bear Grylls Adventure opened in 2018 and the Survival Academy had been open since 2010. And they did like outdoor survival courses. They did like a 24-hour course, a 3-day course, a week-long extreme course in Scotland, all these things. And I remember seeing it and thinking, oh, that's another element that I'd love to try. And I tell you what, so the Bear Grylls Adventure used to be open 7 days a week, which is pretty hefty in terms of like work and things like that, and just staffing and stuff. And I remember it must have been like a Tuesday or a Wednesday or something, like in the evening time. And this is after the grand opening. We were all open again. We were, I can't remember what time of year it was, but we were there and we were packing up ready to go home. And this massive group of scouts walked in, right? And we were all kind of confused, like, why are they here at this time? And it turns out that Bear had given these guys tickets to come and do some of the activities. And the scout leader is a colleague of mine now and a friend of mine, Anna Humphreys, who is a leader, a Bear Grylls Survival Academy instructor as well. And so I remember going like, okay, to the staff, like me and the other team leader were like, we'll run these guys through. And so we ran them through all the activities. And I ended up speaking to Anna, and she was like, you should try the Survival Academy. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll give it a go. So we stayed in contact, and I gave my instructor course a go, because you had to do an instructor course. And that was 3 days in the Forest of Dean, showing all the survival skills, running you through rivers, PT and all this kind of stuff. And then they're like dropping you in the middle of nowhere and go and navigate back, really, really good fun. And I remember thinking like, this is that outdoor stuff that I remember. Like this is ace. And so I kind of kept going with it and doing bits of work and, volunteering a lot for it. And it got to a point where there was a potential for lots and lots of work to come in with this Survival Academy. And I was looking at it and I was going, well, I've got 2 days off a week. I can do it every 2 days, like on my days off, and I can come back into work and I can do these work. And then I was having a conversation. It was like, well, why don't you try being self-employed? And I thought about it, and and it was the risk of going from a fully employed person to them going self-employed. And I remember talking to my parents about it, and we were kind of, it sounded really great, but there was also that massive risk. So I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. And I handed in my resignation at the Bear Grylls Adventure. And I only found out once I did that we could change my contract to a 0 hours contract. And I only found out yesterday, get this. So my 0 hours contract is the only 0 hours contract, or was the only 0 hours contract in Merlin outside of Germany in the world, I think, or something silly like that, or outside of Europe, because they just don't offer them, right? And so I only found that out yesterday. But I went self-employed and I started doing a variety of work. So I do Duke of Edinburgh expeditions as well. So I started doing some Duke of Edinburgh expedition work. And then it was getting to the start point of this BG work, and this was only 4 or 5 days in, and then that was March 1st, 2020, or March 7th, 2020, when they decided to close the whole world down. And I was like, oh no. And so all my work basically just went out the window in the space of 24 hours. And I ended up working in Boots at one of the stores, because I'd done it as Christmas work previously when I was younger, because they had to furlough loads of people. So I was on the front making sure people weren't buying 37 hand sanitizers, and I was, double gloved, double masked, the whole COVID jobby, people coming in to try and buy like perfumes. It just wasn't. And then there was only a certain people were allowed in the store and all these things, it was a strange time. And then after
it all seems so very long ago now, though, doesn't it?
I know.
It does seem a long, long time ago.
I saw a picture the other day of me double masked up. I remember us installing the kind of plastic shields on the tills to make sure people couldn't like spit at us. And there was the little spit at us, not that they would, but I mean, it is Birmingham. But you've got the little window, you give stuff out, and it's so crazy to think about now, isn't it?
Yeah. So it just seems so, like you say, it did. I mean, like, obviously we were supposed to do this podcast earlier on this morning. I had to postpone it because I've been without power for 48 hours after the storm this weekend.
Ridiculous,
and it just like it just stops the world. Like, and that Everything. Was what it was like during COVID. Like, having no power for 48 hours was just crazy.
It's so different, isn't it? I mean, we go to places on expeditions all the time where they don't have power for days, and they run stuff off a generator, and they can do wonders with whatever they have. And in the UK, we're kind of just like, I don't know I can't function.
What to do here? I can't function. Yeah, you try having 2 teenage children that can't have Wi-Fi, that have never not had Wi-Fi. It was just on another level. We even had to go and stay in the Premier Inn last night because it was literally the house was so cold. It was unbelievable.
I think I saw that. Was that because they need to see the I'm a Celeb final as well?
I'm a Celeb final. Well, that was what the post was. But actually, it was more about needing a shower and before they went to school this morning, and a warm bed to sleep in tonight because it has been freezing. Obviously, it did have the plus point that they could watch the I'm a Celeb final as well. So once it all opened back up again, then, and the world was moving, you were straight into the BG stuff, really, weren't you?
Yeah, it was a mix of the BG stuff and the Duke of Edinburgh expeditions. The Duke of Edinburgh expeditions are fantastic for the kids, and especially after that time, people just wanted to be outside. They'd been locked in their houses for so long, or locked in their gardens working from home. The people just wanted to be outside. So mountaineering stuff kind of took off. And so we were doing a bit of like Snowdon summits and these, outdoorsy days with adults. But with kids just wanted to get outside. And I remember like doing one of the first DV expeditions after COVID, and the way the company I work for do it is you do a training day in the school, then you do a training expedition, and then you do your actual expedition. And so it was one of these training weekends that the kids were doing, and we started the walk, and the kids were just, the only word I can describe is frolicking in the fields, just running through the grass, and just being that kind of, having that feralness that kids had kind of lost after when kids are obsessed with their mobile phones over TikTok, over COVID with TikTok and everything. They'd had enough, and they were just like, I want to frolic. Like, don't get me wrong, they still couldn't cook pasta to save their lives. They still couldn't, but that's the best part, sleeping in a tent, being outside. And then with the bear stuff, a lot of the stuff I've done with the Survival Academies, with new kids projects that are coming out. And it was the same with that stuff. People just wanted to be outside. People just wanted to get back into the wild. People wanted to know those survival skills, because I think COVID kind of maybe highlighted part of that. Like, the world stopped, nothing works. The supermarkets are running out of toilet paper. They go, what on earth what can I do? And so I think there was a newfound interest back into that stuff. And I think for the whole outdoor industry, it's been really good,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we certainly saw a massive spike in the UK. Obviously, people couldn't go traveling, could they? As we know, but people were just wanting to get out and do experiences. And I think that, we have seen that change where nowadays, like, it always surprises me, like for my adventure center here, like how many gift vouchers we sell coming up to Christmas, because people want to buy experiences for people. They don't want to buy them stuff. They want to buy them experiences, which I think is just amazing. So, I mean, you were nicknamed amongst our team this year is kind of Mr. Acclimatized, because you kind of didn't really, come down from altitude very often, did you? Like, but what was the first trip? What was the first trip you ever did for us at the Bucket List Company?
So the first trip I ever did for the Bucket List is, and I think it's really quite funny, is Everest Base Camp, because in 2019, before I went self-employed with Merlin, they offered a base camp trip. And so it was with a partnership charity that Merlin have, right? And it was about going to Everest Base Camp. But I was at the Bear Grylls Adventure going, has no one signed up for this here? I was like, this could be something could help, like Bear Grylls. I just wanted to do it. I remember coming home and being like, I need to pay the deposit today. And I went on that trip in 2019. It was a really great trip. There was a little documentary made out of it, which I was in for 5 minutes on Amazon. And I remember talking to Jake. And so me and Jake have worked together quite a lot with other elements and with the Bucket List. And so Jake was like, do you want to do Everest Base Camp? And I was like, yes. This will be my first time back there in 4 years.
And I mean, you've been back with us again this year. I mean, you've done Toop Cows, you've done Killies, you've done Base Camp, Gokyo Lakes. Yeah. But which has been your favourite trip that you've done with the Bucket List Company?
I'll tell you what, I think Everest and Nepal will always have a special place for me, because I love it. I love the mysticism. People can love and hate the length of the trip, because it is a long trip. It's a lot of time to spend with people, but it's also a lot of time away from everything. And so you're really immersed in that. I'd say Nepal is my favorite trip, but I will have to say that the people in Tanzania made it a very close call for Kili, because they are, Whitey and the boys who help us there are absolutely fantastic. I love them to pieces.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It doesn't matter which of our guides you speak to, like that same response comes out. Like it's the country of Nepal and what you get to see, and thinking about how you're stepping in the footsteps of all those famous mountaineers that have gone before you. But then Tanzania for me is just all about the people. Like it's on another level in terms of that.
We had one of our guys, right? So the guy who served the food for the team earlier this year was a guy called January. And we went on our acclimatization hike up to Zebra Rock, and we come back down, and January, he's in a full white shirt, black slacks, posh shoes, bow tie, and chef's hat. And we were just like, what are you doing? He went, I'm serving lunch. What do you mean? And it was just, we were all so starstruck by the fact that he was just wearing this kit, and how he kept it so clean in all that African dust walking up to Kili. It was just ridiculous. I loved it.
Yeah, I think I think there's just such infectious people, and they get into you, and you just can't help but love them. And like, that's people so just good. It makes your trip, I think. Like, and I think that is Tanzanian people in general, but I also think our team are truly special. Like, when we do the dancing and they come out and they do that, and you watch all the other groups on the mountain come around to see what's going on with our group, you can, I think our clients soon realize that they do have some special people with them on the mountain, don't they?
And I mean, the team exactly. I mean, a lot of our team, especially in Tanzania, they know. I mean, they all know everybody, don't they? The guys who work on the mountain, they all know everyone because they've been doing it for years. But our guys, I mean, Whitey stopped counting his summits after 300, didn't he?
Yeah.
Right, and his story is fantastic. How like his family didn't want him to do it, and then he thought he'd try it, and he did his first summit in like posh shoes, slacks, and a shirt. Like it's a brilliant story, and he represents.
Whitey doesn't even know how many children he has. Like that's always one that makes me laugh. Like I remember me asking him one day, and he went, "Hang on a minute," and he got his mobile phone out. He went, "I'll just ask my wife," and he rang his wife to find out how many children he had. And I just think I don't know if it's part of the theatre or if actually that is Whitey, but like it's
maybe.
I mean, it was interesting it was interesting what you said as well about Nepal and. Like I know we had a leader training a couple of weeks ago, and this really came out in the leader training, and it was about the hardest part that we feel as leaders is getting people motivated to get them back down the mountain again.
Yeah, because it's only. I mean, Everest Base Camp is a prime example. It's halfway in terms of you've got there and you now need to get back. I mean, the days are shorter. It's always less days to get back down because you are just hammering it down if you want to go there. And you start getting that oxygen back into your blood and you're like, oh, I want to go quicker, but it's halfway. It's the same as any mountain summit. Once you get to the top, you got to turn back around and you got to get back down. So completely agree.
And it's so hard for us, isn't it, to motivate people as leaders. And even, as much as you try and prime people beforehand and say, like, this is going to happen. No, it's not going to happen. And as soon as they get there, it's like, oh, why are we not back yet? And it's kind of like, it's about that journey again, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's the journey. I mean, a lot of people think of the journey as the first half. It's, I want to get to Everest Base Camp, or I want to get to the top of Kili. And that's a fair point. And if that gets you up there, use that motivation. But it's having that knowledge in the back of your head going, I've got to get back down. I can't just, like on Snowdon, for example, I can't just get on the train and get all the way back down to the car park straight away. I've got to make that descent back down. And the descent is, in some cases, harder physically because the lack of oxygen is tough going up. I mean, I always find going up better than coming down because, I mean, people's knees are it's much more strain on the body coming down, and people find it tough. And when you're tired and you've been hiking for 10 days and now you're descending, that's where the focus can slip a little bit and maybe your footing slips or things like that. And it's the bit where you need to concentrate the most. I think coming down is the bit where you need to concentrate because it's where things can creep in.
Yeah, definitely. So what have you learnt this year then as a leader? What's been the key things for you this year?
Oh, I think this year's been spectacular in terms of trips with the bucket list because, like you say, Mr. Acclimatise is because it was back-to-back trips, wasn't it? It was like Kilimanjaro, then Tube Cow like 2 days later, then Everest Base Camp a week later. And I think what I've learned in terms of on these trips, I think patience. And I know it sounds cheesy, right? But patience is key because as much as we run around in the UK and we're so used to a corporate culture of, I hope this email finds you well. Did that job get done 20 minutes ago? And it's very quick and quick and quick. In a lot of the places that these trips go, it's not like that. It's it'll happen when it happens. The guys are coming up at this point. And it's not to say that they're not actively trying to get solutions done. It's the time scale is not what people expect in terms of certain things. And so if people are going to book onto a trip, I think patience and just be in that culture. I think there's one thing I really like: when immerse yourself fully in wherever you go. Enjoy every part of it because you're going to get more out of the trip that way. I think whether it's in the Atlas Mountains or in Nepal or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? I think there are there are expectations of people that are sometimes not in line with how things are in the country that they're going to.
And I think, there's certain elements which which I understand people will expect, but again, it's like, I mean, Nepal as an example is a third world country, and unfortunately, even with all the tourism, it is still a third world country, and there's elements of that which can be kind of glossed over, I think, because the Everest kind of route is very commercialized, very, very commercialized. And so, and again, it's the same in other areas like Tanzania. Again, Kilimanjaro is commercialized because it brings in a lot of tourism, and that's what is part of it. And you step outside of some of those elements, and people go, "Whoa, this is not what I expected." And it's that kind of don't have your blinkers on, don't be tunnel visioned into where you are and thinking, this place is amazing, it's beautiful, but we're getting a glimpse into a certain element of this country, and there's a whole other part of this country that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, and I think the biggest things are things like just like when people, it's the time, isn't it? Like, we're so used to in the UK thinking if we're told 10 o'clock, it's 10 o'clock. Yeah. But that doesn't work with Tanzanian people, does it? Like, they kind of just take everything with the flow a little bit, don't they? And and as much as it can be frustrating, that's just how they are. Like, that is just part of it.
They're so chilled out. Maybe it's one of the reasons they're so much happier, because they're so happy all the time. They're just a little bit more chilled out. Like you say, be ready for 9 o'clock. We're all ready for 9 o'clock. Everyone's ready to go. And then it's like 9:30 or like 9:20 or something like that. And then something was being sorted, and they're like, okay, we'll go now. It's all good.
Yeah.
And you still make it at the perfect time. So.
And obviously, you were out in Nepal this season. We've done podcasts on this from Nepal this season because it was a season of unpredictable weather and flights and everything else, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was it was interesting in Nepal because I think, the first time I went in 2019, I flew from Kathmandu, which doesn't really happen anymore. And then my trip in May, we had really good weather. We flew out straight away from Ramachap and things like that. But I mean, speaking to Dawa, speaking to the guys at the airport, the flight issues with Ramachap was, I mean, nothing like that had happened for about 4 or 5 years, because I think it was continuous smog/fog at Ramachap, and then the weather was so turbulent in Lukla, like even they were like, this hasn't happened in ages,
And what advice would you give people then that are in that situation if that happens again?
I think it's accepting, in a way, the realities of the situation, because when you're first starting your expedition, all you want to do is start. And what we do with the bucket list here, we give you a day or so in Kathmandu as an example, so you can experience the city a little bit, right? So you have a day, either you'll have a day there and you'll go to Ramachap, or you'll head to Ramachap once you land and things like that. And all people want to do is get to the country because you've been traveling for a while, and then you just want to start the walk. And I completely understand that, and then say you get to Ramachap and they go, oh, there's no flights going today. But, okay, it's like, well, when's the next flight going? It's like, well, our flight hasn't gone today, but those guys on that table, their flight didn't go 3 days ago, so they're still waiting. Everyone's in the same bucket. They want to start the expedition, and dependent on factors as well, like whether helicopters are running, whether people want to pay for those helicopters, whether there's other options and things like that, is whether you want to start that, whether you're motivated enough to start it that quickly. And maybe there's a monetary exchange with that. Like, I need to pay X amount for a helicopter to get up to start my trek. But if you're willing to wait, you can wait and you can still start your trek. And there's a lot of contingency stuff built in with the bucket list. We have days and acclimatization days dotted out through the expedition, so that if there's any stretch and wiggle with transport at the start and the end, then we have that ability to change and to wiggle things around.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I haven't told you this yet, but there was an email that came through over the weekend from one of the people that was on your Gokyo trip, and I'm just going to just read it out now. Jack is truly one of the most impressive people I have ever come across. He has the patience of a saint, and in my opinion, masterfully managed all those people and their emotions in the face of their unreasonableness, emotions, fear, and downright rudeness at times. If there were more Jakes, if there were more Jacks in the corporate world where I spend most of my time, the world would be a kinder and better place.
Oh wow! Oh, that's lovely. That's so nice. That is so nice. My take on it, it's the same as anything, even with kind of survival, with people being on the mountains. It goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, isn't it? If you're cold, if you're tired, if you're hungry, a lot of things are going to seem a hell of a lot worse. So if we can get those things sorted first, look, let's get a hot drink, let's have some food, let's have a chat, let's have a laugh, let's put some warm layers on, let's take the raincoat off. If you can, once you've sorted that, all of that unreasonableness, as you call it, which is valid because you're so in that situation. Once that all those basic needs are sorted, then we can tackle other problems. I think that's how I look at it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think as a leader, you always think to yourself that, what is not a problem for you could be an absolute massive problem for somebody else. Yeah. And it's understanding where people are in, and sometimes you think, okay, you're being really rude about that. There's no need to speak to me like that about it. But in the scheme of things, it's just it's a momentary thing, isn't it? And if we can stop that and prevent that, then that's what we're kind of there to do at the end of the day. I mean, the email went on and said, it was very clear at all times that we bucket list folks were in a much better position than X and X and X teams. I won't mention our competitors in there in terms of options and planning. I am so relieved I switched to the bucket list company trip at the last minute, and I would not hesitate to recommend you folks or go on record in any way you might need for that. Being on top of Gokyo Ri is the highlight of my life to date. It was so magic.
Yeah, Gokyo Ri's beautiful, isn't it?
And I just think it's lovely when you get feedback like that, when the company gets feedback like that. And it was a really challenging trip. It was a really challenging trip. I know I was speaking to you back in, I was in the UK, you were over there. We were in touch all the time. And it was a very challenging trip to both deliver the trip, but also try and meet the needs and expectations of the group as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was a lot of things were thrown our way that, caused a lot of teams to not even get on the trek in the politest sense. A lot of not the competing companies, whether that's UK based or wherever, because of issues that we had on the expedition, weather and all these other little things, teams were still in Ramachap, and not flying for 6 days. Just before Diwali was when we were coming down, and there was flights not going out of Lukla for 4 days, I think, something silly like that. And so, I think we definitely had a good amount of options to be able to kind of to get out of those situations. But whether those options felt great at the time, they did not for some people, which is again fine. You don't want to do them sometimes because you have this image of adventure, and then that's kind of break. You go, oh, maybe this isn't what I expected. And some people, you can feel like that, and you can either kind of shy away from it, or some people just accepted it, and some people really embraced it. They embraced the fact that it was an adventure, which is fantastic. But I understand every response, because there was times when I was looking at it going, what? you know?
Yeah. And I think ultimately it comes back down to that whole thing, doesn't it? That this is adventure travel. Like nothing is always 100% going to go to plan. Like you have not booked a 2-week holiday to Benidorm where, you know, you get transferred to the hotel and the transfer bus picks you back up and you go to Alicante airport and everything is lovely and on time and organized. I mean, even things don't go to plan on those holidays. So imagine taking that to Nepal.
I think it's, like all the stuff with us, we sort everything, don't we? And I think that's why people like it. We go, look, we can sort the flights for you. You can have an English guide with you as like a middleman, essentially, and we can sort that. And I think that's one of the thing that draws people to the bucket list is if you've got no experience in adventure travel, we can sort it all. You've got someone there, so myself or any of the other guys, who can talk you through stuff, and it's not. As much as our in-country guys are fantastic and they do everything amazingly, sometimes the communication, because English isn't their first language, they can't relay stuff in a way that you might understand, or, you know, there can be a bit of heads butting. But if one of us is there and we can relay it that way, you know, I think, and that's where a lot of people come to us, because it kind of takes a little bit of the stress out of it. But then when things can go awry and get a bit more adventurous, some of that stress can creep back in, and we do still have it under control. We do have all the options. It just doesn't feel like it did before, and so I can understand that.
Yeah, like, you know, don't get me wrong, I completely get it. I mean, you know, we were communicating quite a lot on that trip, and, you know, our options were getting less and less and less. But you know, I think the key thing is that at all times we had the customer's best interests in mind. I think that was the key thing about it. It was, you know, you have to get back for your international flights. How are we going to get you back? I mean, you sent me a photo at 3:00 in the morning UK time, and it was a handwritten sign on the door from Lukla Airport saying, weather's bad, no flights for 3 to 4 days, suggest looking at other alternatives.
Yeah.
And that was kind of
just writes on with a Sharpie.
Yeah. And that was how it was. And we were just like, right, okay. And there were literally hardly any options for us. And again, I think if you had been on your own or with local guides, I think you would have struggled a little bit.
Yeah, because I mean, with local guys, I can understand it as well, because they've got you. Say you've got back to Lukla. The getting out of Lukla is like the final step for them as well. So, you know, if it's delayed and there's Diwali coming up where everybody's off and they can see their family, you know, it's like, well, the clients are the best. This is whichever company it is, you know, the clients are the first priority, but there's all these other factors which they can't get influence on. And the guys we use have a bit more influence within the areas. Like our guy managed to sort, I think it was 6 Jeeps from 3 a.m. onwards the next day to pick us up. And so, I mean, and the time of year it was, people didn't need to come and do these pickups because they were going to be spending time with their family and things like that. And so it's big props to Dower for organising those trucks, you know, because that's a difficult element as well. Really difficult element. But yeah, I completely agree. There's some people were definitely stuck there.
And I think a lot of the time as well, though, that you tend to have, like, a lot of the guides live locally to Lukla. Like, they don't live in Kathmandu. Like, they're going to leave you at Lukla and then that's them done then. And then you kind of got to take that journey the rest of the way. And, you know, yeah, I think our guys were properly looked after on that trip. And their best interests were always kind of at the forefront. But like you say, I think having an understanding with adventure travel that things do change. Like just because you booked that itinerary doesn't necessarily mean that itinerary is going to go to plan. You know, I mean, how many days were you were you? How many days were you late flying in the end?
So with our guys, we were only a few hours late flying, and that's because everybody decided to fly with the helicopters on the way up there. Now, so I know some of the other teams that we had out there were out there were waiting for 3 days, and then they flew because they and that was their choice. They didn't want to get the helicopters, and that's fine. But
I think actually they did want to get helicopters. We just couldn't get any helicopters. That was the issue. Okay. The helicopters weren't flying. But it was like I was saying to somebody the other day, though, like, imagine you've booked all your accommodation and now you leave 3 days later than you expected to leave. Like, what's happened to your bookings now? Like, all of those things, like, there's a knock-on effect to everything that then happens that needs to be dealt with. Like, and I know there was like that one day where like 69 flights left Ramchat to get to Lukla. Like, there's 16 people on a flight. Like, my maths isn't that quick to work out. But you think how many people are all looking to stay in Monjo? Like, they're all looking to stay in fact, you know, they're literally, you know, it would have been
1,200 people, I think.
1,200 people, like, all taking that same trek that you are at that same point. Like, there is some logistical nightmares there happening.
Complete. I mean, we were so fortunate because, in a way, because we got these helicopters up there, and then obviously all these flights were delayed, so there was not really loads of people on the trail. So we didn't have it to ourselves, but it felt a lot more like that, which was amazing. I think I really enjoyed it because because it is a busy trek, especially November, which is kind of peak October, November time, which is peak Everest Base Camp time.
Yeah,
there can be a lot of people on that route, and just having less people was lovely. I mean, I don't know what it was like once we left, because we passed a lot of people coming down. Sorry, but we were in a different valley, so it was. But I mean, I had to think what the busyness of Namche and stuff like that was when all those flights came in.
And in terms of, you've done Everest Base Camp, Gokyo Lakes. Yeah. What would be your recommendation? Which would you recommend to people, and why?
So out of the two, I would always say we add the Gokyo Lakes on, right? And it depends whether you want to have that length. It's 4 days extra, 4 days extra, right? And one of the coolest things about the Gokyo Lakes extension is, yes, Gokyo is lovely, and the lake is a blue I don't think I've ever seen anywhere else. And Gokyo Ri, if you want to go up there, it is magical, like what one of the teams said there. But it's the fact that you can do the Chola Pass, and we do the Chola Pass very differently, because a lot of people go to Gokyo first and then go over the Chola Pass, and then they go to Everest Base Camp that way. Whereas we go from Everest Base Camp down and then over the Chola Pass the other way. And you're walking on this glacier with these small gripping crampons. You're heading to a 10-meter wide gap in the mountain, right? And it's so fantastic. I think it feels very, very like Himalayan, you know, like that, all like the older expeditions that people have been on, kind of pioneering a way to get through somewhere. And that kind of what it feels like. You're like, we're heading to that pass and we need to get through that gap. And then we go down. And it's like, okay, go. And then, I mean, on our last trip, we had a helicopter fly about 20 meters above us down over the glacier, because he was doing something very, very quickly. And it felt like we were in a movie. It was awesome. It was so, so cool.
And how much fitter would you say people need to be from a Everest Base Camp perspective to then taking the next step up to Gokyo?
It's elements of it is fitness, isn't it? Because when you're doing Everest Base Camp, you start off on like dirt trails and things like that, and and then it's kind of quite paved, and it gets rockier. And then as you get closer to Everest Base Camp, going near Gorik Shep and things like that, you're kind of walking through like a boulder field, because it's near a glacier, isn't it? You're walking over big boulders and little boulders, and the terrains are kind of up and down. And then when you're doing the Chola Pass, it is a bit like that to start. It starts off kind of flat, and then you ascend up these boulders and things like that, and then you get onto snow on the glacier. So I think in that element, fitness in terms of walking on snow would be useful if you maybe had a little bit of experience in that. But if you don't, it's just building up the residual fitness that you have. So the fitness plan that you stick to do Everest Base Camp, continue that. And if you want to push a bit harder, because it can be quite physical up there because it is a little bit higher than Base Camp. It's a little bit higher.
Yeah, I mean, we say it's a very, from a difficulty perspective, it has its highest rating from our perspective on the website. Yeah. And I think, I think a lot of people, I mean, obviously, as we say, Everest Base Camp isn't up and down. You go up and back the same way you come, which is one of the biggest, apart from the Chola Pass, apart from Gokyo Lakes and seeing them themselves. I think it does make it a nice way of doing it, that you're not going up and down the same way.
Yeah.
And I also think that, as we discussed earlier, about that motivation of getting back down, if you're on the Gokyo Lakes trek, it's not kind of that thing of, I'm going down the same way again. It's kind of, I've got other things to go and see. So it kind of, it makes it easier for you to go and do that. But I would say it is a next step up from Everest Base Camp, isn't it? In terms of,
it's definitely time wise, because you start relatively early to go over the Chola Pass, and it is just uphill to get to the Chola Pass, and you get to the top, and then the way we go, because it's a little bit steeper on the way down on the other side of the Chola Pass, right? And so you do that, and you've done that element, but then there is more walking to do after. So in terms of fitness as well, endurance is definitely something to highlight. Just being on your feet for longer periods of time with weight in your backpack and walking, that kind of character trait and that ability will definitely pay you back in dividends if you train more for it, having that time on your feet. For Everest Base Camp, but then mainly for the Chola Pass, because they can be long days. A day, the Chola Pass day is a long day. So
yeah. So what are your next trips then, Jack?
So in January, I am back in Kili with a group that are booked for January, which should be fantastic. And then in February, I'm doing a winter tube cow. So I'm really excited for that, because the winter mountaineering stuff, I've got some experience from a personal trip I went on to South America a couple of years ago, and that was really good fun. And it was out of my comfort zone because I'd never done it before. So I'm very intrigued to get back into it, to do it again. So
perfect. And then what, out of all of the trips that we've got at the Bucket List Company that you haven't led yet, which is the one that you're like, I want to go and lead one of them?
So is this mountains, or is this like?
No, this is anything. You can choose which you want.
Okay. I mean, the Annapurna circuit really appeals to me, and so does K2, I think. So I think Annapurna's like K2 mountain wise, but I mean, there's so many, and then there's the Inca Trail. I'll leave it with K2 is number one, Annapurna circuit is number two, and then a scuba diving trip would be awesome. Because I used to scuba dive when I was younger.
We'll have a fight for that one. And what is on your bucket list? Like, what is a trip that you would love to do? Maybe not something that we offer, but what is on Jack's bucket list?
Oh man, that's a straight space. I'd love to go to space, and that sounds daft, right? But I'd love to go to space. Space, or oh god, I want to go back to South America, because I went on a trip to do Chimborazo, which is, and I only found this out recently, it is the closest point to space on planet Earth. The gravity is 5% less on the top of Chimborazo, and we didn't make it to the summit because weather was bad, and I remember saying, look, I don't think I can do it, and I remember coming down. So I'd love to try that again, to tick that one off my list. I think that'd be really good.
Well, Jack, thanks ever so much for coming on to the Bucket Lister podcast today. It's been great chatting to you. Been great hearing your stories and giving your wisdom and advice as well on some of the destinations that you've been to. Hope you found that this episode really interesting. Hopefully you'll get to do a trip with Jack very soon. But again, Jack, thanks ever so much. I'll be back next week with another episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. But until then, thanks very much. Goodbye.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.